Hello, everybody. Welcome back to round one, match two, week 8, Modern Super League. We have Carolyn Pardee on Rakdos Evoke with pretty okay, less evoke-y opening hand against Mason Clark on this sort of Cascade Beans deck that we've seen Aspiring Spike and others championing the last week or so. What do you make of these opening hands?
Yeah, Carolyn's hands certainly on the weaker end of the spectrum of the hands that Rakdos can produce. No grief, not dead after all, nothing like that. In the opening turns, so just going slowly with a Thoughtseize into Bowmasters into Fable. That's a pretty good mid-range plan, right? You play a powerful card on every spot of the curve, but is it going to be good enough on the draw? Who is on the play? Let me clarify that.
At a glance, I would guess Mason's on the play just based on the clocks. I still see 40 minutes on
Yes.
Caroline's mid-go clock.
It is a hand. Yeah, it is a hand I should be happy keeping on the draw, but maybe not be thoroughly excited by. And on the Masons end, we see, just a few spells to cast, Leyline Binding and Fire Ice to interact in the first two turns, and then Shardless Agent to access the beans. So that's probably the opener that Mason wants. Seems like about perfect to me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what do you think are some of the more important things that could end up coming out of this matchup? Like, how would you expect it to play out?
The 4-color deck is going to have a stronger late game. And given the fact that Up the Beanstalk is an enchantment and Rakdos is not particularly well suited to deal with them, it's a pretty powerful card if Mason manages to snag some into play early with this Shardless Agent, or he just draws some, or maybe with some later Cascade spells. Then I think he would be advantaged over a longer game. But for that reason, I suppose that this Thoughtseize might target the Shardless Agent.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the cards in Mason's hand, you had already kind of called out a couple of the interactive pieces with Shardless Agent hitting the bin pretty quickly, leaving Mason with just Fire Ice, Leyline Binding, Omnath, and lands.
Fire Ice matching up pretty nicely against Orcish Bowmasters, and we see the classic Thoughtseize bag in place once again. Shardless Agent right at the top once again, replacing the one that just got discarded.
So one of the things hanging out in Caroline's hand is this copy of Orcish Bowmasters. Do you think that there's a world that can maybe overpower some of the card flow that we'll see from Up the Beanstalk, or is it just not enough?
It is helpful, but it's helpful at dealing a little bit of damage. So you need to back it up with some extra pressure, right? And given that there is none, especially since Mason chosen to ice the land, stifling the development from Carolyn pretty heavily. The Bowmaster pings are not gonna probably not gonna amount to all that much, right? You need to, like, Bowmaster is gonna be good at dealing the last 5 damage maybe, but it's not gonna be great at dealing the full 16.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. And knee-jerk reaction is to think, wow, blowing ice like that means that fire can't act or Orcish Bowmasters. But if you look at Mason's hand, there's 2 Leyline Bindings, a Solitude, and a slew of other white cards to pitch. I'm getting sort of worried that this game's going to just slip away from Caroline if she can't find any way to get some pressure on the table.
I definitely agree. Every single removal spell now just draws an extra card for Mason, so every Leyline Binding is just more cards, and every Solitude is gonna be more cards. Like, that never stops, and at some point you will just run out of threats as Carolyn. So it's gonna be a little bit rough. We're probably going to
Ooh.
see an Omnath deployed right now. Actually,
Well,
no.
speaking of rough, there's not Omnath mana. Both of the red and the
Yeah,
white source are on the same land. You can see him kind of Mason circling his hand on MagicOnline. Kind of far from casting Solitude as well. I wonder if we're maybe going to see sorcery speed Leyline Binding to just find a better land to play than this island.
yeah, that sounds like a good plan. Get rid of the. Actually, a good question. Not sure if I would prefer to get rid of the Fable token or maybe of the Fable of the Mirror Breaker itself. Both of those seem like reasonable plays. Was that
Yeah,
an
it's
attempt
really
at
tough.
casting?
It's not like Carolyn's signaling strength here, so I almost wonder if denying the rummaging is worth it.
Yeah, at the same time, Shardless Agent just trades with the Fable token perfectly, so if you can do that, that's pretty good for you. So yeah, as we were talking, we see Leyline Binding on the Fable. That makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, I like doing it at sorcery speed as well, so you don't get punished by something like this Orcish Bowmasters, which we see hanging out in Pardee's hand.
Exactly. Not a single reason to do it at instant speed, I believe.
And now over the last couple of turns, Carolyn's drawn Fury, has drawn another copy of Fable of the Mirror Breaker. This is a really tough decision, I feel like.
Yeah, the hand is full of relevant cards, but I'm kind of puzzled myself. Like, which one would I want to go with? Even seeing the hands of both players is pretty rough. I'd imagine having to account for hidden information too, right?
I think developing a copy of Fable here makes some amount of sense. Just it's going to take several turns for you to accrue the full value from the card. Getting it down earlier is better.
Yeah, that makes sense. On top of that, you have the Marsh Floods, which you are for sure happy discarding, especially if you opt to choose your treasure to keep your treasure in this spot. So you have one card that you are always happy to cycle with your Fable.
All right, well, Shardless Agent number 3 off the top. Gonna leave Mason with Leyline Binding mana up. Another copy of Up the Beanstalk on the battlefield. Orcish Bowmasters can almost just eat Shardless Agent with triggers if Mason casts anything, but I don't think that's gonna be super relevant.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be.
Again,
It's gonna add up at some point.
16 is a lot, so that's probably gonna be a bit rough. But with 2 beans, it gets kind of closer.
Flooded Strands of Sight for Sore Eyes for Mason off the top. There's that other source for Omnath, most importantly, and it unlocks the second white source for Solitude.
Exactly. We might see a sorcery speed leyline binding once again. Although this time there is 2 mana open, so Orcish Bowmaster. Notably, Orcish Bowmaster actually could have been deployed in response to the Up the Beanstalk to get that 1 extra trigger, but not what Carolyn opted for.
I think I like the patient play just so it can shoot down the Shardless Agent itself.
Well, that will be the case. Well, because it will be on the stack. That is indeed true. So makes perfect
Ooh.
sense.
Interesting evoke of this Solitude. So I guess that's going to hit the Bowmasters?
Assuredly, yeah. Just want to, you're gonna cast a Solitude sooner or later with this Bowmaster on the battlefield. It's pretty, like, you don't really have many more options, so it makes sense that you're gonna do that. So it makes sense to also prevent the 2 Amass triggers from that would have happened from the Leyline Binding Beanstalk triggers.
And now all of a sudden, Mason's hitting this point where because he has 2 Up the Beanstalks, any pitch elemental he, say, free casts is actually netting him cards, even though he has to exile something to cast it.
And now it's gonna net even more cards with the extra copy of Up the Beanstalk.
Ooh, just casting an Omnath for now. This has got to be one of his signature spells at this point.
Interestingly, no Terminate in response to the draw trigger of Omnath, meaning that Mason gets to develop 4 life and 4 mana and hardcast the Fury. So that's a really strong play now.
Ooh, wow. This is so huge. And this is what's so strong about all of these MH2 elementals, right? Is early, we always talk about how strong they are to pitch cast, how you can cheat on them with things like Undying Evil, but they also are just very strong 5-mana cards in their own right.
Yeah, I would argue that like they often are just better in their 5 mana versions than they are in their evoke versions, and that is absolutely true. Like Fury, it's like Glorybringer value or even better, right? But on top of everything else you get. Pretty crazy
Right.
card.
This is bananas. We see the 5th land coming down for Caroline. She's casting her own copy of Fury, which is going to shoot down one of Mason's creatures. and has Undying Evil up to protect it if Mason were to kill it in a fairer way than Leyline Binding. Oh, is she exiling? Okay, so she's evoking for the Fury instead of casting it. Pitches Terminate. Fury hits the table, going to shoot something down. I imagine we're going to see Undying Evil combo with it to go after both of Mason's threats.
It has to be the case. I imagine that was the plan the entire time, which was why the Terminate was being saved.
Mm-hmm.
And now the Orcish Bowmaster would be pretty useful at punishing some extra up the beanstalk triggers, but we see Fire Eyes ready to answer Bowmasters pretty cleanly. So it's not going to be as potent. Unless Mason just opts to hardcast Eagles of the North next turn, but that would not be the play I would choose to go with.
This is pretty interesting, right? We see 2 Bloodbraid Elves and up the Beanstalk. We're kind of running into this problem where there isn't actually anything else for these cards to hit other than Shardless Agent, right? Teferi, Time Raveler, maybe?
Yeah, there is no Teferi. Yeah, there is one Teferi in Mason's deck only.
That's one of the things with all these pile of draw spells decks is eventually your draw spells are just drawing more draw spells and you need to play to the battlefield at a certain point.
Yeah, but also, viewing it through another lens, if your entire deck is all draw spells and all you do is draw and draw and draw, then like you get to choose which cards you play and which ones you don't. So at some point you probably are fine not casting the extra Bloodbraid Elves you end up drawing. But this was pretty interesting. The Fire Ice was actually spent on the Fury, which means that the Orcish Bowmasters and the second copy of Orcish Bowmasters that Carolyn drew are actually going to be a pretty huge problem for Mason. So this game actually is kind of turning around for Carolyn. I didn't like her position just a while ago, but getting better.
Oh, look at this. So we have Omnath hits the battlefield, card draw trigger on the stack. Caroline responds with Orcish Bowmasters, ideally going to deal a lot of damage to this Omnath just off of drawing cards, but is it going to be one short?
Seems like
No.
we're opting for just face damage.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so I guess the idea here is that Fury is going to just fight through Omnath.
Seems like it, yeah. Notably, second Orcish Bowmasters waiting for, I guess, this stack.
All right, this stack referring to Mason casting Solitude, triggering 3 up the beanstalks, 3 magic beans, if you will. Orcish Bowmasters hitting the stack. This is the second Orcish Bowmasters. So oh my god, this is so much damage.
Yeah, it's gonna be 7 extra Bowmasters triggers, which is gonna put Mason at 7 life if all of them go face. There is also 2 Solitudes though, so that lets Mason exile 2 threats, which is probably going to be the Orcish Bowmasters, given how big of a threat it is. Are we targeting Omnath this time? It seems like it makes perfect sense. As we have to assume the Solitudes are going to deal with Bowmasters and probably the army, which is going to be very big in 8/8 real soon. So that would leave Caroline with Fury in play, which is a fearsome threat, but we see a 4th Solitude already ready to go in Mason's hand as soon as he draws a single white card in his 3 extra up the beanstalk draws. So, oh no, there's another Bowmaster which was on the stack, right? So there's actually 2 Bowmasters that the Solitudes have to deal with.
This is berserk. So Orcish Bowmaster is still doing a lot of work mowing down Bloodbraid Elf and Omnath alike. There is a Solitude still on the stack for Mason. We heard about one that got evoked a second ago that took care of the first one. Carolyn's empty-handed, and Mason has a full grip at this point, but a lot of it looks to be Bant lands and Bloodbraid Elf.
Yeah, Fire Ice can definitely help as it is a removal spell for the Bowmasters, and you can target one of the big creatures with the Solitude and then probably take the hit from the other one and be fine.
Oh, wow. Okay, so the card Fire finishes off the copy of Orcish Bowmaster with the original Solitude after this journey of a stack. Finally hits the battlefield. I assume it's
It
just
did take
gotta
a
go
while.
after the army token. Maybe it goes after Fury?
Seems pretty similar. Both of those are for 8 damage.
Oh, Bloodbraid Elf can get to Fairy Time Raveler next turn, which deals with the army token.
Yes, yes.
What a
Also, the
wild
Solitude
game.
was not actually evoked, which throughout the entire journey that this stack was, escaped me, and I assumed it's going to go straight to the graveyard, but it was actually just a 5 mana version of it, so.
Classic Omnath mana, just doing stuff that one would never expect to be able to come up.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, Mason discarding the 4th up to Beanstalk to hand size is very loud here.
We take a look. He only has 18 cards left in his deck. Is that correct? That is not
Yep.
too many. Not too many 5-drops. Plus, you get to cast, right? So definitely need to be careful at some point.
Yeah, 19 is actually kind of a lot of damage to have to deal, and this Solitude going on the stack, exiling the army, is going to put Caroline up to 27. I actually ran into this exact problem last week on Super League against Javier on Tron, where the game was basically rolled up, but I had 4 cards in library and he had 25 life, and that's that.
Yeah, I didn't quite catch what the Bloodbraid Elf has cascaded into, but it seems like Mason opted not to cast the card. Maybe
Yeah, maybe
just
he just revealed his deck.
maybe just have more cards in his deck.
Yeah.
Oh, Fury!
Holy, this Fury off the top is so brutal. It's just taking out every way that Mason has to deal damage in his deck.
Yeah, it's a real danger now for Mason to actually just mill out 15 cards. The Time Warp seems like a way to go over the top. The Fury kills in 4 attacks. That technically gets there fast enough, as long as Caroline never top decks anything, I guess.
All right, 5 mana Fury, 3 Beanstalk triggers. What
Honestly, I
a
have to
game.
say,
This has been
yeah,
bananas.
I have to say I'm really a big fan of the fact that Up the Beanstalk is not a May. The card would be would lead to it leads to so many hilarious scenarios like that where it's just like the overabundance of resources actually hurts the player trying to win the game in time, and it's just so interesting to look players struggle against their own cards like that, where they have just too many resources. It's just too much. Like if it just said you may draw a card, that would not happen, and it would be much more boring. But I'm really a big fan of that aspect.
Oh my god, this is so fun. Okay, so we see the Fury, we see the Time Warp. Now Mason has Shardless Agent and Bloodbraid Elf. Notably, spells he can cast that don't delete a bunch of cards out of his deck.
Hmm. So the Fury attacks for 6. If you play Bloodbraid Elf, that doesn't really help. Well, it is a free turn clock, so it does help.
Yeah, I think
Adding
you
the
have to
Shardless
cast
Agent onto
it.
that.
So -9 from 24 is going to be 15. Okay, well, Teferi Time Raveler now hits the battlefield. Oh, bouncing his own up the beanstalks with Teferi Time
Nice.
Raveler. You got to do what you got to do.
Only one Teferi in Mason's deck though, so that was just the one time he could pull that trick, but he has to wrangle with the rest of the beanstalks for the rest of the game.
All right, well, 12 into the red zone, sending Caroline down to 12. She has one more draw step.
I believe it. If it's a Fury, then the Fury could deal with the Blood Red Elves, and that is still probably not good enough to actually make Mason mill. So Bolter
All right.
Delta doesn't really do it.
What an absurd game one. I feel like in a lot of ways, Mason kind of got to do exactly what his deck wanted, and Caroline had a pretty slow start, all things considered. I'm somewhat concerned how things are going to end up looking from here if a hand that was as slow and I would say as anemic as Caroline's still felt like it was able to put up a fight for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, out of the sideboard, what do we see? Caroline able to bring more Blood Moons if that is the angle that she wants to fight on. A copy of Shieldred the Apocalypse, which is yet another card that can punish the up the beanstalk pretty heavily.
Ooh, we see Blood Moon cannot get those in the deck fast enough.
Mm-hmm. You know, the
And it looks like
effectiveness of the Blood Moon is always a little bit shaky against the 4-color decks. They tend to be able to get their basics quickly enough, often enough, and operate with without access to a certain color for some turns. Weirdly, you know, more like better than you would expect from a 4-color deck to do. But certainly, it's a useful angle and a way to steal games.
we also see Torah coming into the deck. Lightning bolts hitting the board makes some amount of sense. Not exactly at its strongest in this matchup.
Exactly, Torak pretty exquisite against the decks which removal suite is mostly white cards, but there's one interesting tool that Mason brought. It was actually 3 copies of Leyline of Sanctity, so pretty high impact card if he gets to ever have it in his opening hand. Not this time though.
All right. Well, looking at Caroline's hand, it looks like she just has the 1, 2, 3 of Thoughtseize, Bowmaster's, Blood Moon. Hard to throw that back, but do you think she needs to?
Uh, I would have a hard time mulliganing this away. Yeah, I would probably just keep and be happy enough. It seems like it can get you places. A little bit awkward that it seems like she will not get to access 2 swarms before playing the Blood Moon on turn 3 unless something changes with the draw steps. But besides that, hand seems solid.
Ooh, tough opener for Mason, it looks like, with 2 shock lands instead of fetch lands. This Blood Moon might actually be lights out. Thoughtseize
Yeah.
hits the stack.
If the Footsie takes up the Beanstalk, then Caroline's hand matches up pretty excellently against what Mason has for now.
Yeah, and just like you said, that up the beanstalk hits the bin. Mason finds a flooded strand off the top, which is surprisingly strong here.
Choosing to develop a tapped Shockland instead, which makes sense. You want to pay some respect to Blood Moon, but you also don't want to just ruin your entire care forever. Oh, Leyline, not at its best.
Hey, listen, that means that Mason doesn't have to exile a Solitude or an Omnath to a Solitude. So really, is it that bad?
It is a tangible upside of the card, the fact that you can pitch it to your Solitudes, yeah. Although it is always somewhat tough, right? When you're trying to sideboard Leyline of Sanctity against the Thoughtseize decks, and like it both helps you because if you open with it, it's great, right? Your opponent cannot ever target you with their Thoughtseizes. They're all just dead draws at that time. While on the other hand, you are naturally making your deck have many weaker top decks. And it's always an interesting puzzle as to whether Leyline of Sanctity is the correct approach for a given matchup.
All right, we see a top Blood Krypton in step. Caroline being very respectful of the likes of Leyline binding, not wanting to expose this Orcish Bowmasters. And Blood Moon resolves with Mason finding us planes.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Steam Vents go.
So 2 colors of two basic land types for Mason. So Leyline Binding is a 4-mana card at the moment, so not even castable with what Mason got in play. Not even present in Mason's hands either. So we're pretty far away from dealing with this Blood Moon and playing a reasonable game. So maybe I spoke too soon when I commented on the card's effectiveness in the matchup when we were watching the sideboarding decisions.
Caroline making some rummaging decisions on this Fable that she cast last turn. Not already dead makes sense, or not dead after all, excuse me. Fairly academic choice here. Keeps the rest of the cards, finds a Marsh Flats. Getting closer and closer to that hard cast Fury. For now, just dashing Ragavan.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of mana coming from all of this.
Pitching a Leyline, dealing with the Ragavan, I assume.
Yep, there goes Ragavan. Playing a little bit of life total swap as Caroline goes up to 19 and Mason about to go down to 17 from this Goblin Shaman.
I'm gonna see a Thoughtseize probably taking the Solitude unless Mason decides to cast the Solitude in response.
I love this post-combat Thoughtseize.
It was a pretty solid Thoughtseize, and Mason is still stuck, unable to cast anything, so...
It's so berserk, right? If he just draws any other land and then just draws a couple of Furies, he's somehow back in this game.
Yeah, that's true. Fury is like an excellent anti-Blood Moon technology. It's always funny when kind of like sideways solutions to problems like that happen in constructed Magic. I am a big fan of that.
Oh yeah, I know. Talking to a KCI master like yourself, I'm sure that you've had a bunch of scrap trawler looking like insect elaboration games where you're just threeing your opponent to death.
Yeah, those were my favorite games, like post-board games of KCI when I just attacked my opponent with Thopters made with Psi, Master Thopterist, and Scrap Trawlers. That was pretty good aggro deck sometimes.
Ooh, okay. It looks like Caroline has decided the time to go is now. 2 in-step Orcish Bowmasters against Mason, who just hit land number 5. Reflection of Kiki-Jiki, no longer summoning sick. How close to lethal is this if she just evokes a Fury and goes for the throat? Oh, doesn't matter. She's playing it careful. I love
Seems
this.
like this too late for that line, but it would have been pretty close, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Would be 1 off anyway, so makes sense to wait and just hardcast Fury for greater value.
Yeah, this is great. Now she just has a 3/3 double strike on the table. I think we're about to see the concession from Mason. I don't know what he can draw here.
Eagles of the North, yes.
Some cards are just the funniest ones to draw when you're extremely dead, where you're just like, why do I have this draft common in my deck at all? It's also the one he was the closest to casting. All right, we have game 3. We have Mason on the play. Mason certainly going to be more respectful of Blood Moon this game with a hand that can do it with Up the Moonstalk, Shardless Agent Fury to Caroline's Lands Fable Blood Moon. I'm a bit worried about Caroline's draw hand on the draw, especially after winning a game with Blood Moon just now.
Yeah, no plays available on turn one or two, and we see that Mason's hand is just perfect to play around Blood Moon. He just gets to circumvent it entirely by fetching both of his basics and having access to the island. So it would be a pretty rough keep if Caroline decides to go with this one.
It looks like she kept in a lot of ways. I guess if you see Mason be too respectful, you can just fable away the Blood Moons.
Yeah. I'm more worried about the fact that there is no plays on turn 1 or 2 on the draw, right? So like the first play you make is just kind of late in the game, and you kind of need to be the aggressor in the matchup because the late game of the Beanstalk is certainly goes bigger than yours.
Listen, grief off the top. I believe it. It's going to happen. It wouldn't help actually because
doesn't
there's
help
not another
much.
black card.
2 griefs off the top.
All right,
Doesn't seem
terminate
like
off the top, not what the doctor ordered. All right, beans for Mason, draws more beans. All right, he has assembled the Forest Plains Island Tron. This agent finds beans number 3.
No Noble Master to punish the beans. It's gonna be pretty hard for Caroline right now, I have to imagine.
All right, fetches the swamp. Draws the other terminates. It's got to be Fable time.
Yeah, the Blood Moon is just... it would just be convenient for Mason because he wouldn't need to, pay free life to access his red mana.
Yeah, as it stands, Blood Moon would actually fix his mana, given that he has 3 Bantlands in play and a Hallowed Fountain. All right, pitch casting Fury. Draws 2 off the beans. Holy, beans number 3. Just a land off the top, though. He doesn't have pressure. With all these terminates, I'm starting to wonder if we might see a game like game 1 where Mason struggles to actually deal 20 points before he draws 60 cards.
Yeah, I didn't quite catch the way Mason has sideboarded, so I'm not sure if the Time Warp is still in the deck. There's an Emra called the Eon Storm in his sideboard, which actually you could use as a way to prevent...
That would be unbelievable if that's what we saw happen. Ooh, Torok off the top. This is real. This is one of the real things that can actually be drawn to get Caroline back into this game.
Exactly, and this Torok could get really big if Mason discards a bunch of cards in his cleanup, looking for answers to Torok and triggering his beans a lot of times, so that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, there aren't actually very many answers to Torok in Mason's entire deck, other than Fury.
Yeah, there was Furies, but notably Mason just pitched a Fury to Fury last turn, so only 2 left in his deck.
Sure, and it looks like Caroline decided to keep 1 copy of Blood Moon in this case, which I can see some amount of it. Makes it harder to just hard cast most of your other pitch elementals, right? You can't hard cast Solitude, which you see Mason rip off the top here.
It does make sense. The unfortunate consequence of that is that Torok requires 3 black mana to be properly kicked, and now we don't have access to that.
Oof.
That's a pretty big downside of that play, I believe. Now we're gonna see a 2 mana version of Torok, which still fine if it gets followed up with Grief into Undying Evil to discard 2 cards. Well.
Oh, that's interesting, sure. You really need the second card to get discarded, right? Or else you can't even really get through the Shardless Agent with Torok.
Yeah. And unfortunately, there's 2 removal spells, so Okay, well, there's
Oh,
also free extra cards from this Leyline Binding, which it's just so much, right? Imagine like you cast your 1 mana. Okay, it's 2 mana in this exact moment, but like you cast your sometimes you cast your 1 mana Leyline Binding to remove one of your opposing threats when playing the Beans deck, and then also it turns out it's an Ancestral Recall, so things are pretty wild at times. Interesting. Does Mason pull the trigger on anything, or does he just let the trigger of grief resolve?
yeah, there's certainly the spot where you kind of just say, all right, you know what? Ball's in your court. You can look at my hand and continue playing, or we can move on.
Mm-hmm.
All right, yeah, it
All
looks
right.
like Fire Ice is the take.
Well, this turns out to be pretty solid, Caroline, still, because the Turak is going to
Oh, sure. Taking Fire Ice means that it clears the way for this grief to get Undying Evil.
exactly, and then you take Fury, and your Turak is virtually invincible now, right? If there is just one Fury left, and no, that's not what we see. All right, so the plan is different.
Oh, so the idea here, I would guess, is that Fury can only answer one of the creatures on the battlefield, and Fury answers it back.
That might be the thought process behind that line, yeah. Mason also needs to fetch a Steam Vents to get access to his second red mana, which brings him down to 15, which is still a healthy life total.
All right. Solitude off the top as well. Oof. All right. 3 beans triggers off Fury drawing. Lorian revealed Fire Ice Omnath.
Mm-hmm. 4 damage to
Wow.
the Fable of the Mirror Breaker.
Okay. Well, I guess
I have
nothing here on Caroline's side can attack.
the cleanup Turak trigger. I have to say, it was an interesting choice from Mason's side because he has to be aware of the fact that the Turak answers in his deck are pretty sparse, right? So
Yeah,
is he
I'm pretty.
planning to go over the top of the card in some way instead of tangling with it with removal spells?
Yeah, it was pretty surprising to see the Torok survive there. Maybe the plan had been to just try and race it?
Instead, we see Caroline attacking for a lot of damage, bringing Mason down to 11. Double Fire Ice is a way to deal with Turak. I guess that still works.
All right. Omnath hits the battlefield, draws a card. Blooded Strand on the table.
I wonder if we're gonna see that, or if Mason is still going to prioritize dealing with the other targets first. Maybe hardcasting Solitude.
Well, it's pretty scary. As you pointed out, there's a certain point where you can't actually cast that many spells, or else you're going to discard step and Torok's going to grow out of range.
Mm-hmm. He does go with Solitude.
Okay. Well, there's the other Fury. That's a good answer to Torok growing.
Oh yeah, the Fury just great here because it lets you answer the Turak on the same turn. Caroline is tapped out, so you know there is no combat tricks that you have to be scared of. So that probably is going to. That's probably it. I think this probably locks the game. Unless Caroline top decks the second copy of Turak and kicks it. I could imagine that actually working out.
Yeah, there's a certain degree where Mason is just running really low on ways to deal damage and only has, what, one more copy of Fire Ice or something like that in the whole deck?
I think so. That was not a Turak though, just a Blood Crypt, which probably doesn't cut it.
Pretty rough at this point, but she does have a Castle Lock-Twain activation on Mason's instep. I don't think the door is completely closed on the Torak line.
I agree. Although certainly Caroline has to work a lot harder for, that one single card draw compared to what happens on Mason's side.
Oh, wow. Mason just taking the hit from Grief here, draws Leyline Binding. Bunch of Shardless Agents in hand. Fire, getting Ragavan out of the way. Yeah, at this point, Mason's just winning the race. Solitude and Omnath coming across. Caroline down to 9. Mason up to 17.
Is this turn going to be the triple Shardless Agent turn? Just free morphs.
Listen, sometimes you just need is a Goblin Hero? Is that the 3-mana 2/2 out of starter or something?
Unfortunately, my knowledge on those vanilla creatures is not so good, so I chose to go with a morph. It's funnier this way for me. Unfortunately, missing out on the green mana to play the last copy of Shardless Agent.
Fury off the top might be just enough to stay in the game for another turn.
It's for sure gonna be good at prolonging it. You get to deal with Solitude and a Shardless Agent. Maybe just to assign all of the damage to Omnath. But it's pretty easy for Mason to have extra Omnaths in hand, given that it's legendary and he has drawn so many cards. Seems like Omnath was the choice. So.
Yeah, I think my read here is just that this puts it down to Mason having 7 on board in case Mason just has a bunch of removal spells in hand. It's really tough. I mean, at this point, you're just kind of figuring out which half or 1% play you're going to go for.
Exactly. Blood-Red Elf, a haste creature.
Leyline of Sanctity, not a haste creature.
Yeah. No removal for the remaining 2 creatures. Probably the game is not going to be over just yet. Oh, second Blood-Red Elf.
Oh, cannot tap those lands fast enough. Or Omnath. All right, really doing the victory lap with this Omnath here. Bloodbraid, Cascade, bunch of cards on the bottom. Bloodbraid again, Cascade again. Entire deck on the bottom of the deck. I love looking at the number of revealed cards that Mason has.
115. Yeah, that's all.
I don't know if I've seen that number that high before. That is going to be game 3 going to Mason Clark. So